people who are now saying we shouldn't have locked down, I think the question to them is, where were you going to source that number of body bags if you weren't going to lock down?
You know what my position is, but I also tried to hedge it slightly at the top by saying, none of us knew what we were in for. Looking at the lockdown files and those conversations between Cabinet Secretary, the Health Secretary, the people in question who had their hands on the levers of power, what do you come away thinking about the government's pandemic response?
Well, at the time, I think most of us who were looking at the science and looking what was happening in other countries, which were a few weeks ahead of us, were wishing for more action sooner to try to stop the spread of this virus. The numbers that were coming out from abroad were roughly 1 in 100 of people who got this virus were dying. That's an awful lot of people. And so the priority at that stage, when we didn't have any medicines that worked and we certainly didn't have a vaccine, was to stop the spread of the virus. Now, if we had done things differently, it's possible that we could have avoided prolonged lockdowns. We could have done it much, much more quickly by suppressing the virus. And perhaps we could take another track like some of the other countries in the world and started sooner and kept the numbers and lost fewer lives. As it was, we did have lockdowns, and there's absolutely no denying that lockdowns were very unpleasant for lots of people and were very damaging to industries in lots of ways. But what was the alternative? And I think people who are now saying we shouldn't have locked down, I think the question to them is, where were you going to source that number of body bags if you weren't going to lock down?
But wasn't the evidence that people had already started non-pharmaceutical interventions of their own, i.e. those who felt vulnerable, those who felt scared, the elderly, those maybe who had been weakened by some sort of respiratory illness, had already stopped going out? I mean, this happened 2 weeks before lockdown was announced.
Before lockdown was announced, all of our doctor surgeries had changed to working online so that we could keep up. Lots of us had worked ahead of the government, but people needed help to avoid the virus, and you can't just separate. You don't know who's going to be vulnerable. You absolutely didn't. Some people are definitely more vulnerable than others, but we didn't know at that stage who would be the people who would be in difficulty. And it was really, really scary. I think that's something you don't understand. You're talking about Matt Hancock trying to use fear. The fear was already there. There was no
Well, then
need
he amplified it. He amplified the fear, and he made people frightened people. He terrified frightened people.
There may have been people within the cabinet who really needed to take this a bit more seriously and realise it was scary. There were people who were partying, but that wasn't the general public. The general public, on the whole, were really, really law-abiding and were doing what they were advised. The trouble was that the advice kept changing every 5 minutes. There was another set of rules. And, it was very difficult for people to know what was the right thing to do.
But Helen, sorry, you said at the beginning, before more was known about the fatality rate, that it was 1 in 100. Then we were told repeatedly that the chances of dying of COVID if you were over or younger than a certain age was mostly less than 1%, 99.9, 9% if you were a child or 0. Do you see? And so there was a mixed message, wasn't there? You're not likely to die of this, but you have to stay at home in case you kill someone else. If you had to do that again, is that the messaging that you think the government should use?
I mean, I think that the messaging that we all need to look after each other.
That's not what they said, Helen, at all. They said,
absolutely.
Don't go out or you'll kill Granny.
I totally agree that I wouldn't have used the messaging that they used. However, I don't think that we were wrong to lock down when we did, except that it should have happened earlier. And certainly there were all sorts of things which were the real urge to lift all the measures as soon as we possibly could. And then let's encourage everybody back into enclosed indoor spaces.
Eat out to help spread the virus out.
Exactly.
To get the virus out, yeah.
And we all knew, anyone in the scientific community was kind of, really hitting their foreheads and saying, that is a really, really stupid thing to do. And why would you do that?
But why didn't the doctors, the BMJ or the BMA say eat out to help out was a really stupid self-defeating policy that would spread the virus and cost a lot of money?
I think you will find that lots of people did say that at the time, and that it was economically counterproductive, because if you then send people out and more people get the virus, then more people have to take time off work, more people can't work, and we ended up because of the way we opened up and the way we spread the virus and the way we went back into schools without any testing. Do you remember that whole, oh, goodness me, nobody expected this great big spike in September. Of course we all expected that. There were so many ways we could have done it better, and we didn't. And
so you think the COVID inquiry needs to happen beyond what we've seen already, so all this can be digested and processed and used and created, so lessons learned file instead of lockdown files can be produced.
There's a really important lessons to be learned, because unfortunately, it would be fabulous if this was the last ever pandemic, but that's probably not the case. There is likely to be another one, and we need to know why did all the test and trace go so horribly wrong? There's arguments that because it all went out to newly formed private companies rather than building on what we already had, that was a big mistake. Why did the PPE? Why was there not the PPE? Well, there's all sorts of issues about who the contracts were given. We need to look at those lessons, and we definitely need to look at the communication and the mixed message. And if you look at some other countries in other parts of the world who hung on until we had the vaccines, their overall mortality was much, much, much lower. And we need to respect the people.
Hung on in what sense? What do you mean hung on? What didn't lock down?
Yeah, no, who did lock down? Who actually
locked down until the vaccine? Yeah,
till the vaccines come. And I think we really need to look at this carefully, out of respect to all those people, all those doctors and nurses who lost their lives, all those people who've lost their family through the pandemic. We need to say, okay, what was done wrong? What could be done better? And what do we need to do differently next time? But Helen, just before I let you go, the way you're talking, it's as if lockdown was the first, NPI that the country could reach for. But in fact, the WHO said it was a measure of last resort, and it would affect the poorest worst. And of course, that's what we saw from all the collateral harms that are unspooling now. There were many collateral harms, and particularly because we didn't support people who had to isolate. So lots of people
my point is, Helen, is that was lockdown the only thing the government could have done? And was lockdown the only thing they could have continued to have done for the best part of 2 years?
There is a really interesting question about if they got their heads together on test and trace and done that properly, whether we could have contained the virus better. But there was no time. They had already wasted a lot of time. And it's a question of, okay, well, what else do you do to stop this virus, which at that stage was killing very, very many people who were infected. So, yes, it's a very blunt instrument, but it's a very quick instrument. And if you don't have anything else in your armoury,
but it's one that only has temporary success. Anyway, Helen, thank you so much. I'm afraid, Dr Salisbury, we have to leave it there.